Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along tonight to be part of this discussion on nuclear weapons elimination and international humanitarian law. Really appreciate the fact that you've given your time to be involved in this discussion. My name's Marianne Hanson, and I teach and research here at the University of Queensland, and I focus especially on weapons control and in particular on nuclear weapons control. I'll be kicking off this seminar, and I'll then hand over to my colleagues for their contributions. After we speak, we anticipate having 30 or 40 minutes for questions from you, so please feel free to consider questions, and we'll do our best to field them. But before I go any further, let me introduce my fellow panelists. The speaker who will be following on from me is Eve Massingham. Eve is a PhD candidate at the T.C. Burns School of Law here at the University of Queensland. Her research is looking at weapons law issues in armed conflict. Eve also holds a Bachelor of Laws, Graduate Diploma of Legal Practice, Master of Laws and Master of International Development. She's worked in international humanitarian law for the Red Cross for over 7 years, and she's published on topics in international humanitarian law and on international law and the use of force. Eve has also worked as a lawyer and a judge's associate, and has served brief stints as an Australian Army Reserve officer and with the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in Hague. Dr. Jenny Nielsen is a postdoctoral research fellow in the School of Political Science and International Studies here at UQ. Previously, she was a research analyst with the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament program at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. She was a program manager for the Defence and Security program at Wilton Park and a research assistant for the Mountbatten Centre for International Studies at the University of Southampton, where, among other things, she was tasked with co-editing the various editions of the Non-Proliferation Treaty Briefing Book. She holds a PhD from the University of Southampton, which has focused on US nuclear non-proliferation policy vis-a-vis Iran in the 1970s. So, having done those introductions, let me start. What I thought I would do is just outline the state of play with regard to nuclear weapons, providing some broad statistics and findings and a general overview of what's happening at the moment. From the outset, I would like to point out what motivated us to hold this seminar today. And this is pure and simply the fact that nuclear weapons are not explicitly outlawed under international law. Seems hard to believe, but that is the case. There is a clear legal gap when it comes to the possession and use of nuclear weapons. So unlike chemical weapons and biological weapons, unlike landmines and cluster munitions, which have all been banned because of their devastating impact and because they manifestly violate international humanitarian law, nuclear weapons have managed to remain in what I call a humanitarian-free zone, such that we still see over 16,000 of these weapons in existence, held by a handful of states, which appear determined to keep them and which, from time to time, threaten to use them, even though every one of these states has promised to eliminate these weapons. But if these few states have managed to avoid humanitarian arguments against nuclear weapons until recently, this is changing. A new humanitarian initiative has been launched by a large group of non-nuclear states, and it is the unfolding of this process which is currently garnering much attention. Now, there are a number of issues which drive this new humanitarian initiative. First is the very obvious catastrophe and human suffering that would result from a nuclear strike. Second is the growing view that these weapons have no military utility now, if they ever did. And third, the view that keeping on with the status quo will only motivate other states to acquire them. And as the Canberra Commission in 1996 noted, so long as any state has nuclear weapons, others will want them also. The proposition that nuclear weapons can be retained in perpetuity by any state and never be used, either accidentally or by decision, defies credibility. Moreover, any use of nuclear weapons will be catastrophic. So here we are, 20 years after the Cold War has ended, and we still have over 16,000 nuclear weapons in existence. Many of these are on high alert status, and most of them have a destructive capability many times greater than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima nearly 70 years ago. So you can see here the sort of allocation we're talking about. By far and away, the United States and Russia hold around 90+ % of the existing nuclear weapons. Iran, by contrast, has 0 nuclear weapons. And I think it's important to get that on the table. The deal that has been negotiated with Iran is, in my view, a very good one, which is likely to head off any possible proliferation there. But, you know, on the one hand, while we are concerned about proliferation, let's keep in mind that these states are continuing to hold thousands of nuclear weapons. I also want to point out that many of the weapons, the majority of weapons that are still in existence, are vastly, vastly more powerful than the weapons that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And just to give you a sense of the kinds of weapons that have been developed over the past 70 years, this is the size of the Hiroshima bomb. This was the Trinity Test. Now that circle is here. So the Hiroshima bomb is here, and we humans have been spectacularly able to put together weapons which have a destructive capability that is almost beyond imagination. This was the firepower of the Bravo test conducted by the United States, and this, the largest nuclear weapons explosion ever, the Tsar bomber test conducted by Russia. So what we're talking about then is not just still quite a few nuclear weapons, but weapons of immense destructive capability. Now this carries with it risks and dangers, and I think that is self-evident. There are dangers of accident, there are dangers of miscalculation and misperception, and there are the dangers of false alarms. I've put just a couple of examples here which make for rather sobering reading, but in fact there are many, many, many more instances where we have been extremely lucky to have averted nuclear war or an accidental strike. I think one of the most notable examples was the instance in 1961 where a US Air Force plane accidentally dropped 2 nuclear weapons onto North Carolina. This was a catastrophic mistake. Now, each of these was immensely powerful. The first one, the safety switches stayed intact, no problem. The second one, 3 of the 4 safety switches failed. And it was just by the sheerest good luck that the 4th safety switch held. Otherwise, we would have seen devastating consequences. More recently, we see instances where, much as we like to think of ourselves as being in command of these issues and controlling weapons, and we know what we're doing, we're rational states, mistakes are made all too often. In 2007, we had a B-52 taking off from an airbase in North Dakota, which was inadvertently loaded with 6 advanced cruise missiles with nuclear warheads intact on them. Nobody knew about this. They were missing for approximately 36 hours, including just sitting at the tarmac at the next Air Force base, unguarded for 9 or 10 hours. We talk about nuclear security, we talk about the need to prevent terrorists or non-state actors from getting nuclear weapons, but our management has really not been as good as it should be. There's also the very famous case of the Soviet gentleman who saved the world, and I've just put a little blurb here. There is a film that is already out. I do recommend you seeing it, The Man Who Saved the World. Basically, he was, if he followed orders, he was to launch weapons against the United States because there was a report that American nuclear missiles were heading towards the Soviet Union. The fact that he went against protocol and argued, look, this could be a false alarm, probably saved many, many millions of lives. And I would also point you to a very new document, the report that has been made available called Too Close for Comfort, Cases of Near Nuclear Use and Options for Policy. This was put out by Chatham House late last year. And basically, the findings of this report, again, make for very sobering reading. We believe that we've lived through a fairly stable period. We've not had a nuclear weapon detonated in war in the past 70 years. But evidence suggests that we've in fact been extremely lucky, given the many instances in which nuclear weapons were very nearly used, either inadvertently because of miscalculation or error. And you may be aware the 2009 collision of French and UK submarines, the charges of misconduct prosecuted against Air Force personnel in 2013. All of these suggest cause for concern about the current management of nuclear weapons. Now, I'd also like to just draw your attention very briefly to some of the reports that have come out as a result of the Humanitarian initiative. The initiative is going to be addressed in more detail by Eve and by Jenny, but I wanted to draw your attention to some of the most pertinent findings that have appeared in the past few years. Now, you will all have heard the nuclear winter, the sort of devastating consequences of that. Well, unfortunately, we actually underestimated how devastating things would be. And in fact, were there to be a nuclear exchange, a nuclear strike, utilising less than 1% of the existing stocks of nuclear weapons would produce unparalleled catastrophe and unspeakable suffering, as these reports show. There would, of course, be a devastating loss of life, and the findings were that no government, no international agency would be able to respond. So we can forget the idea that doctors and nurses would be able to come in and nurse those who are alive. And it has been said that those who are alive will envy the dead. Moreover, there would be, it is under the modelling, there would be significant effects on the climate. It was believed until fairly recently that the climatic changes would produce a famine, would result in a famine for up to 1 million people. That figure has been revised upwards. And essentially, as the Austrian government recently noted, the consequences on health, the environment, infrastructure, food security, access to water, uncontaminated water, climate development, social cohesion, and the global economy would all be systematic and potentially irreversible. So it's a rather gloomy note to end on, but I'll now hand you over to Eve and to Jenny, who will be able to say a little bit about what's actually being done to address these issues. So thanks, Eve.